My daughter-in-law slapped me and said, "You already got your inheritance. Now pay for my plastic surgery and wedding." I stood in shock. She thought I was just an heiress. Everyone at dinner laughed, until I made one phone call that silenced the entire room. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." I should have known something was wrong the moment I walked into Clayton's dining room and saw that smug smile on Lennox's face. My daughter-in-law had that look she got when she was planning something, the same expression she wore when she convinced my son to buy that ridiculously expensive car last year. "Norma, there she is, our favorite benefactor," Lennox announced, her voice dripping with honey that barely masked the venom underneath. She was wearing a dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, her blonde hair styled in those perfect waves that took hours at the salon. Clayton barely looked up from his phone. At 35, my son had grown into the kind of man who measured success by his bank account and treated family dinners like business meetings. "Hey, Mom," he mumbled, not bothering to stand or offer me a hug. I set down the homemade apple pie I'd brought, my hands already trembling though I didn't know why yet. "I thought we were celebrating your promotion, sweetheart." "Oh, we are celebrating," Lennox said, her eyes gleaming. "We're celebrating how generous you're going to be with that inheritance money." The other guests around the table, Clayton's business partners and their wives, all turned to look at me with those polite, expectant smiles that made my stomach churn. I felt like I was on display, a prize cow being evaluated at auction. "I don't understand," I said quietly, lowering myself into the chair they'd left for me at the far end of the table. The seating arrangement itself should have been my first warning. Lennox laughed, that sharp sound that always made me flinch. "Don't play dumb, Norma. We all know you inherited a fortune when Harold died. It's time you started acting like it." My late husband's name hung in the air like a slap. Harold had been gone for 3 years now, and not a day passed that I didn't miss him, despite everything. But hearing Lennox speak about him so casually, so callously, made my chest tighten. "I've been thinking," she continued, standing up and beginning to pace around the table like a lawyer addressing a jury. "I need that tummy tuck and breast lift we discussed. The consultation alone was $15,000, and Dr. Morrison says the full procedure will be around $45,000. Plus, Clayton and I have been looking at venues for our vow renewal ceremony." I blinked. "Vow renewal?" "A proper wedding this time," Clayton finally spoke up, his voice carrying that entitled tone I'd grown to hate. "Not that courthouse thing we did 5 years ago. Something worthy of our status." "Status," I repeated, tasting the word like it was poison. "The Ritz-Carlton has an opening in 6 months, Lennox said, her voice rising with excitement. 150 guests, full reception, the works. We're looking at about $200,000 for the whole event." The numbers hit me like physical blows. 45,000 for surgery, 200,000 for a party, nearly $250,000 that they expected me to hand over without question. That's a lot of money," I whispered. "Money you have," Lennox snapped, her mask finally slipping. "Money that's just sitting there while I'm walking around with this postpartum body and we're stuck in that tiny apartment." "The apartment is lovely," I said weakly. "It's beneath us," Clayton said, finally putting down his phone. "We need something that reflects our position. A penthouse maybe, something in Manhattan." I looked around the table at all these faces staring at me expectantly. These people who saw me as nothing more than a checkbook with legs. The weight of their collective greed pressed down on me like a physical force. I need to think about this," I said. That's when Lennox's face changed completely. The fake sweetness vanished, replaced by something ugly and raw. "Think about what? You're sitting on millions while your own son lives like a peasant." "I'm not living like a peasant," Clayton protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "You could be living so much better if your mother wasn't being selfish with money that isn't even really hers," Lennox shot back. The conversation around the table had stopped completely. Everyone was watching now, sensing the drama unfolding like vultures circling carrion. "Lennox, please," I started to say, but she cut me off. "No, I'm tired of tiptoeing around this. You got lucky when Harold died and left you everything. You didn't earn it, you didn't deserve it, but you got it anyway. The least you can do is share it with the people who actually matter. Of course you matter, I said, my voice breaking. You're my family. Then act like it, she hissed, moving closer to me. Stop hoarding that money like some miserly old woman and start taking care of your responsibilities. I felt tears stinging my eyes. This wasn't how family was supposed to treat each other. This wasn't love or respect or even basic human decency. This was something else entirely. I said I'd think about it, I repeated. That's when she struck me. The slap came so fast I didn't see it coming. One moment I was sitting there trying to process her words, and the next my cheek was burning and my head was ringing from the impact. The table erupted in shocked gasps, but underneath it all, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Laughter. Not horrified gasps or demands that Lennox apologize. Laughter. Quiet, uncomfortable chuckling from Clayton's business partners. Amused whispers from their wives. And worst of all, nothing from Clayton himself except an irritated sigh, as if I had somehow brought this on myself. You already got the inheritance, Lennox said, her voice steady despite having just physically assaulted me. Now pay for my surgery and our wedding. It's the least you can do. I sat there, my hand pressed to my burning cheek, looking around at these people who were supposed to be my family, my son's friends, decent human beings. Instead, I saw strangers. I saw people who viewed me as nothing more than an obstacle between them and money they thought they deserved. The silence stretched on, broken only by the sound of silverware clinking against plates as people resumed eating, as if nothing had happened, as if slapping a 67-year-old woman was just part of the evening's entertainment. My purse was on the floor beside my chair. With shaking hands, I reached for it and pulled out my phone. My fingers felt clumsy as I scrolled through my contacts, but I found the number I needed. I need to make a call, I said quietly. Make it quick, Clayton said without looking up. Dinner's getting cold. I dialed the number, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The phone rang once, twice, then a familiar voice answered, Margaret Thornton speaking. Margaret, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. It's Norma. I need you to come to Clayton's apartment. Bring the papers. There was a pause on the other end of the line. All of them? All of them. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I hung up and set my phone on the table. The entire room had gone quiet again, but this time the silence felt different, charged, dangerous. Who was that? Lennox demanded, but her voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. I looked up at her, really looked at her for the first time all evening. She was beautiful in that artificial way that money could buy, but there was something rotten underneath all that polish. Something that had infected my son and turned him into someone I barely recognized. That, I said, was my attorney. 20 minutes had never felt so long. I sat at that dining table, my cheek still stinging from Lennox's slap, while the conversation around me resumed in uncomfortable fits and starts. Clayton's business partners kept glancing at me like I was a ticking bomb, while their wives whispered behind their hands. Lennox had retreated to the kitchen, claiming she needed to check on dessert, but I could hear her on the phone, her voice sharp and urgent. Clayton just sat there, playing with his food like a petulant child who'd been told he couldn't have ice cream before dinner. The waiting gave me time to think, which was both a blessing and a curse. My mind drifted back to the early days, when Harold was still alive and Clayton was still my sweet little boy who brought me dandelions from the yard and told me I was the prettiest mommy in the world. Harold. Even thinking his name brought a complex mixture of love and pain that I'd never quite learned to navigate. He'd been a good provider. I'll give him that. Worked 60 hours a week at the insurance company, never missed a mortgage payment, always made sure we had food on the table and decent clothes on our backs. But Harold had also been the kind of man who believed that providing financially was the extent of his responsibilities as a husband and father. He came home tired, ate dinner in front of the television, and expected the house to run itself around his schedule. If Clayton needed help with homework, that was my job. If he had a school play or a soccer game, I was the one who showed up while Harold worked late or had mysterious business dinners that seemed to multiply as the years went on. I'd accepted it because that's what women of my generation did. we accepted and adapted and made the best of things. We didn't complain when our husbands treated us like housekeepers who occasionally shared their beds. We didn't demand more because we'd been taught that wanting more was selfish. But the loneliness had eaten at me day by day, year by year. The feeling that I was invisible in my own home, valued only for what I could provide rather than who I was as a person. When Harold died 3 years ago, I'd grieved for him. Of course I had, but mixed in with the grief was something else, something I was ashamed to admit even to myself. Relief. Relief that I could finally breathe in my own home. Relief that I could watch what I wanted on television, eat dinner when I felt hungry, go to bed when I was tired instead of waiting for him to finish whatever he was doing. The life insurance money had been substantial, $500,000 plus his pension and retirement accounts, nearly $1 million total. More money than I'd ever imagined having access to. But instead of feeling wealthy, I'd felt lost. For 42 years, I'd defined myself by my role as Harold's wife. Without him, who was I supposed to be? That's when Clayton had stepped in, full of helpful suggestions about investments and financial planning. He'd introduced me to his financial advisor, a smooth-talking man who'd convinced me to put the money into various accounts and portfolios that I didn't understand, but that supposedly would provide me with a steady income. What I hadn't realized at the time was that Clayton had also convinced me to make him the primary beneficiary on everything. Just for estate planning purposes, Mom, he'd said. You know how complicated these things can get. I'd signed the papers because I trusted him, because he was my son, and sons were supposed to take care of their mothers, weren't they? But something had changed in Clayton after that. He'd started treating me differently, not as his mother, but as a resource to be managed. He'd moved in with Lennox shortly after Harold's funeral, and suddenly every conversation we had seemed to revolve around money. At first, it had been small things. Could I help with their security deposit? Could I cover their utility bills until Clayton's next paycheck? Could I lend them money for a vacation because they'd been under so much stress? I'd said yes to all of it because I wanted to help, because I wanted to feel needed and useful. Because the alternative was admitting that my own son saw me as nothing more than a bank account with feelings. The worst part was how they made me feel guilty for even having the money, as if I'd somehow cheated by outliving my husband, as if Harold's death had been some kind of lottery win rather than the end of the only life I'd ever known. Lennox had been the worst influence on Clayton, though I tried not to blame her entirely. My son was a grown man who made his own choices, but she'd amplified something ugly in him, some sense of entitlement that I'd somehow failed to stamp out when he was young. She had a way of making everything seem reasonable when she said it. Of course they needed a bigger apartment. Clayton was a successful businessman after all. Of course she needed those expensive treatments at the spa. She was representing the family now. Of course I should be happy to pay for their lifestyle improvements. What else was I going to do with all that money? But tonight had been different. Tonight, she'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The physical violence was bad enough, but it was the laughter that had really broken something inside me. The casual cruelty of it, the way everyone at that table had watched me get humiliated and found it amusing. I pressed my fingers to my cheek, feeling the heat that still radiated from where she'd struck me. I was 67 years old. I'd buried my husband, raised a child, spent 4 decades being the kind of woman who put everyone else's needs before her own. And this was what I had to show for it. A son who barely acknowledged my existence unless he needed something, and a daughter-in-law who felt comfortable enough to hit me in front of a room full of people. The sound of the doorbell made everyone freeze. Lennox emerged from the kitchen, her face pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. "Expecting someone?" she asked Clayton, but her eyes were on me. "That would be my attorney," I said calmly. Clayton's fork clattered against his plate. "Your attorney? Mom? What the hell?" I stood up slowly, my joints protesting after sitting in that uncomfortable chair for so long. "Her name is Margaret Thornton. She's been my lawyer for the past 2 years." 2 years? Clayton's voice cracked like he was 13 again. "Why do you need a lawyer?" I walked toward the door, past their shocked faces, past the uncomfortable guests who were probably wishing they'd stayed home tonight. My hand was steady as I reached for the doorknob. Because, I said, looking back at my son and his wife, there are some things about your inheritance that we need to discuss. Margaret Thornton was exactly the kind of woman I'd always wished I could be. At 58, she commanded attention the moment she walked into a room, not through artifice like Lennox, but through sheer presence. Her silver hair was pulled back in a sleek bun, her navy suit was impeccably tailored, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd spent 30 years fighting battles in courtrooms and winning most of them. "Mrs. Patterson," she said warmly, extending her hand to me. "I came as quickly as I could. Thank you, Margaret." I shook her hand, drawing strength from her steady grip. "I think it's time." Margaret's sharp eyes swept the room, taking in the shocked faces around the dining table, the expensive artwork on the walls, the general atmosphere of barely contained panic. She'd been a litigator before she'd specialized in estate planning, and I could see her reading the room like a crime scene. "Good evening, everyone," she said pleasantly. "I'm Margaret Thornton, Mrs. Patterson's attorney. I understand there's been some discussion about inheritance matters tonight." Clayton stood up so fast his chair nearly toppled over. "Look, I don't know what my mother told you, but this is a family matter. We don't need lawyers involved." "Oh, but you do," Margaret said, her smile never wavering. "In fact, you very much do." She set her briefcase on the coffee table and opened it with practiced efficiency. Inside were several manila folders, each one thick with documents and labeled with neat, precise handwriting. "Mrs. Patterson called me tonight because she felt it was time to clarify some misconceptions about her financial situation," Margaret continued. "Misconceptions that seemed to have led to some rather inappropriate behavior." Lennox had gone very pale. "What kind of misconceptions?" Margaret pulled out the first folder and opened it. "Well, for starters, the belief that Mrs. Patterson is simply a wealthy widow living off her deceased husband's insurance money." "She is," Clayton said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Actually, she's not." Margaret pulled out a document and held it up. "This is a certificate of incorporation for Patterson Holdings, LLC, filed in Delaware 28 years ago. The sole owner and managing member is listed as Norma Jean Patterson." The silence in the room was deafening. I watched Clayton's face as he tried to process what he was hearing, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "I don't understand," he said finally. "Let me explain," Margaret said, settling into one of the armchairs as if she had all the time in the world. "Your mother didn't just inherit money when your father died, Clayton. She's been building her own fortune for nearly 3 decades. She pulled out another document. "In 1996, Mrs. Patterson used $15,000 from your college fund, money she replaced within 6 months, I should note, to make her first real estate investment. A small apartment building in Queens that was about to go into foreclosure. I remembered that building so clearly. 4 units, all of them occupied by tenants who couldn't afford to move but were desperate to stay. The previous owner had been bleeding money because he didn't understand that sometimes being a good landlord meant being patient with good people going through hard times. She bought it for $65,000, Margaret continued. Fixed it up herself, and I do mean herself. She learned plumbing and electrical work from YouTube videos and turned it into a profitable investment within 18 months. Mom?" Clayton's voice was small, confused. "You never told me about any building." I looked at him, this son I'd raised and loved and protected, even when it meant protecting him from the truth about who I really was. "You never asked, sweetheart." Margaret was just getting started. That first building generated enough income for Mrs. Patterson to purchase a second property 2 years later, then a third. By the time your father passed away, she owned 17 rental properties across 3 boroughs. The numbers hit the room like hammer blows. 17 properties. I watched Lennox's face as she tried to calculate what that might be worth, watched her realize that her understanding of my finances had been completely wrong. "But that's not all," Margaret said, clearly enjoying herself now. "Mrs. Patterson also began investing in small businesses, a food truck that became a restaurant chain, a cleaning service that became a commercial janitorial company, a tech startup that developed an app for seniors. She pulled out a thick portfolio and set it on the coffee table. Would you like to see the current valuation of Patterson Holdings, Clayton? He nodded mutely, like a man in shock. Margaret opened the portfolio to reveal columns of numbers, property addresses, business names, investment accounts. The total at the bottom of the page was circled in red ink. $8.7 million, she announced. As of last month's assessment, the room erupted. Clayton's business partners started whispering excitedly among themselves, their wives craning their necks to try to see the documents. But I only had eyes for my son and daughter-in-law. Clayton looked like someone had hit him with a brick. 8 million? Mom, that's impossible. What's impossible about it? I asked quietly. Did you think I was incapable of learning, of growing, of becoming more than just your father's wife? Lennox had found her voice. Why didn't you tell us? All this time, we thought. We thought you just had the life insurance money. You thought I was helpless, I corrected. You thought I was some doddering old widow who got lucky when her husband died. You thought I didn't deserve the money I had because I hadn't earned it. Margaret cleared her throat. There's more, I'm afraid. More. Clayton looked like he might be sick. Mrs. Patterson has also been your benefactor for the past 5 years, though she chose to do so anonymously. Margaret pulled out another folder. Your rent, Clayton. The lease on your apartment is actually held by one of your mother's LLCs. Clayton's face went white. What? She's been paying your rent since 2019, $1,200 per month. That's $72,000 over the past 5 years. And the car, Margaret continued, consulting another document. The BMW you drive? It's registered to Patterson Holdings. Your mother makes the payments. $650 per month for the past 3 years? That's an additional $23,400. Lennox was gripping the back of Clayton's chair so hard her knuckles were white. You've been paying for everything? Not everything, I said. Your credit cards, your student loans, the medical bills from when Clayton had his appendix out. Those I paid directly. I didn't want you to worry about money while you were trying to build your careers. Margaret flipped through more pages. Shopping at Nordstrom, dinners at expensive restaurants, that trip to Europe last year. Your mother has been covering your lifestyle for years, and you never once thanked her because you never knew. The weight of it all was settling over the room like a fog. I watched my son and daughter-in-law grapple with the realization that everything they thought they knew about our family dynamics had been a lie. Why? Clayton whispered. Why didn't you tell me? I stood up and walked over to him, placing my hand on his shoulder the way I used to when he was small and scared. Because I wanted you to feel independent. I wanted you to believe in yourself, to think you were making it on your own. Tears were starting to roll down his cheeks. I thought I was successful. You are successful, I said gently, but not in the way you thought, and certainly not successful enough to treat me the way you have been. Margaret closed the portfolio with a decisive snap. Which brings us to why we're here tonight. She pulled out one final document, this one single page with official letterhead and multiple signatures. Mrs. Patterson called me tonight because she's decided to make some changes to her financial arrangements. Effective immediately, all support payments will cease. The apartment lease will not be renewed when it expires next month. The car payments will stop as of tomorrow. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the traffic on the street below. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the sound of my own heart beating. You can't do that, Lennox said, her voice sharp with panic. We have expenses, obligations. You have jobs, I said calmly. You're both educated adults. You can figure it out. Clayton was still staring at the portfolio, as if the numbers might change if he looked at them hard enough. Mom, please. I know we messed up tonight, but... You didn't mess up tonight, Clayton, I interrupted. Tonight was just the culmination of 5 years of taking me for granted. 5 years of treating me like an obligation rather than a person. 5 years of letting your wife speak to me with disrespect while you said nothing. I looked around the room at all these people who'd watched me get slapped and laughed about it. Tonight, I remembered who I am. And who I am is not someone who accepts being treated as less than human by her own family. Margaret was packing up her briefcase, her job complete. Mrs. Patterson, if there's nothing else you need from me tonight? I shook my head. Thank you, Margaret, for everything. As she left, I turned back to face my son and daughter-in-law. They looked smaller somehow, diminished by the revelations of the past hour. The question now, I said quietly, is what happens next. The dinner guests began leaving shortly after Margaret departed, mumbling awkward goodbyes and avoiding eye contact. I didn't blame them. They'd come expecting a pleasant evening and instead witnessed the complete implosion of what they'd thought was a normal family dynamic. Clayton and Lennox sat in stunned silence as the last couple gathered their coats and hurried out. The apartment felt different now, smaller somehow, as if the truth had taken up all the available space. "Mom," Clayton said finally, his voice hoarse. Can we talk about this?" I was still standing by the window, looking out at the city lights that stretched to the horizon. From up here, New York looked like a circuit board, all those glowing connections spreading in every direction. It reminded me of my business network, the web of investments and properties and partnerships I'd built over the decades. "What would you like to know?" I asked without turning around. "Everything," Lennox said, and for the first time since I'd known her, she sounded genuinely humble. I don't understand how we got it so wrong. I finally turned to face them. They looked like children who'd just been told there was no Santa Claus, struggling to reconcile this new reality with everything they'd believed. "You got it wrong," I said, settling back into my chair, "because you never bothered to look beyond the surface. You saw an old woman living in a modest apartment in Queens, and you assumed that was all there was to see. But you never said anything," Clayton protested. "You let us think?" "I let you think what you wanted to think," I interrupted. "What was easier for you to believe? That I was helpless and dependent, rather than capable and independent?" Lennox was shaking her head slowly as if trying to clear it. "The apartment in Queens. That's not where you really live, is it?" I smiled for the first time all evening. "Oh, it's where I live. But it's not the only property I own in that building. I own the entire building, actually. Have for 15 years. Clayton blinked. "The whole building?" 24 units. I live in the smallest one because I don't need much space, and because it keeps people from asking questions. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my photos until I found the one I was looking for. But when I want more room, I have options. I showed them the photo of the penthouse I'd created by combining 3 units on the top floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Manhattan skyline. Hardwood floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and the kitchen was something out of a magazine. "I use it for entertaining business associates," I explained. "People who need to believe they're dealing with someone substantial." Lennox stared at the photo like it was an alien artifact. "Business associates? Did you think I managed $8 million in assets from my kitchen table?" I asked. "I have a team, Lennox. Accountants, property managers, investment advisors, lawyers. People who've worked with me for years and who respect what I've built." I swiped to the next photo, showing them the conference room I'd set up in another unit. A long mahogany table, leather chairs, wall-mounted monitors for video calls with investors across the country. "This is where I work," I said, "where I've been working for the past 28 years, while you both assumed I spent my days watching soap operas and feeling sorry for myself." Clayton was studying the photos with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle. "The food truck you mentioned, was that Mario's?" I nodded. "You remember Mario's? You used to take me there when I was little. Best tacos in the city." His voice was distant, lost in memory. "You knew the owner." "I was the owner, Clayton. I bought Mario out when he wanted to retire, then helped him expand. We have 8 locations now, and Mario's grandson runs the day-to-day operations." The truth was flowing out of me now like water through a broken dam. For so many years, I'd kept these secrets locked away, living a double life because it seemed easier than dealing with everyone's expectations and assumptions. "The cleaning service is called Spotless Solutions," I continued. They handle commercial contracts for half the office buildings in Manhattan. The tech startup is called Silver Connect. They developed an app that helps seniors navigate online banking and social media. I pulled up the app on my phone and showed them the interface I'd helped design, thinking about all the older people like myself who'd been intimidated by technology. I didn't just invest money in these businesses, I said. I worked with them, learned from them. I spent weekends learning how to read financial statements, how to evaluate market opportunities, how to negotiate contracts. Lennox was staring at me like she'd never seen me before. All those times you said you were busy when we wanted to go out for dinner or shopping. I was busy, I was working. I scrolled through more photos on my phone. Here's the warehouse in Brooklyn where Spotless Solutions stores their equipment. Here's the commercial kitchen where Mario's prepares food for all 8 locations. Here's the office building in Midtown where 3 of my tenant businesses are headquartered. Each image seemed to hit them like a physical blow. The scope of what I'd built, the life I'd been living in parallel to the one they thought they knew. The apartment we live in, Clayton said slowly. You own the whole building? 36 units, I confirmed. Bought it in 2018 when the previous owner was facing bankruptcy. It was a mess. Half the units were vacant. The ones that were occupied were behind on rent. The building itself needed major repairs. I showed them before and after photos of the renovation. Crumbling brick facades transformed into elegant stonework. Outdated lobbies converted into welcoming spaces with marble floors and modern lighting. It took 2 years and $3 million to bring it up to my standards, I said. But now it generates $48,000 in monthly rental income. Lennox was doing math in her head. I could see it. That's almost $600,000 a year. From one building, I said. I own 7 apartment buildings, 12 commercial properties, and have stakes in 15 different businesses. The silence stretched on as they absorbed the magnitude of what I was telling them. Finally, Clayton spoke. Why didn't you tell me? All these years, I thought. I thought you needed me to take care of you. You did take care of me, I said softly. You called me every week, visited when you could, worried about my health and my safety. That's not the same as managing my money, Clayton, but I could have helped. With the businesses, the investments. How? I asked, not unkindly. You work in marketing for a mid-level consulting firm. You make $65,000 a year. What experience do you have with real estate development or small business management? He flinched, but I pressed on. I didn't tell you because I didn't need your help, and because I was afraid you'd try to take over. The way your father always tried to take over everything. That hit home. Clayton's face crumpled slightly, and I knew he was remembering Harold's need to control every aspect of our lives, his inability to believe that anyone else, especially his wife, might be capable of making important decisions. I spent 42 years having my opinions dismissed and my capabilities questioned, I continued. When Harold died, I finally had the chance to prove to myself what I was capable of. And it turned out I was capable of quite a lot. Lennox had been quiet for several minutes, but now she looked up with tears in her eyes. We treated you terribly. Yes, I said simply. You did. The things I said tonight, the way I hit you. She pressed her hand to her mouth. Oh God, Norma, I'm so sorry. Are you sorry because you hurt me? Or because you found out I'm worth $8 million? The question hung in the air between us. Lennox opened her mouth, then closed it again, seemingly unable to find an answer that wouldn't damn her further. Clayton stood up abruptly and began pacing. This changes everything. The way we've been living, the way we've been treating you. Mom, we didn't know. Would it have mattered if you had known? I asked. Would you have treated me with more respect if you'd known I was wealthy? Or would you have just demanded more money? He stopped pacing and looked at me. Really looked at me for what felt like the first time in years. I don't know, he admitted. And that scares me. I nodded. At least you're honest about it. I stood up and gathered my purse. I need to go home now. It's been a very long evening. Mom, wait, Clayton said. What happens now? With us, I mean. I paused at the door, looking back at my son and daughter-in-law. They looked lost, uncertain, as if the ground beneath their feet had shifted and they weren't sure how to stand. "What happens now," I said, "depends entirely on what you do next." The phone started ringing at 7 in the morning, 3 days after what I'd come to think of as the dinner revelation. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again. And again. I was sitting in my real kitchen, not the modest one in the small apartment where I usually received visitors, but the spacious, granite-countered space in my penthouse, drinking coffee and reading the Wall Street Journal. It was part of my morning routine, staying informed about market trends and economic indicators that might affect my investments. After the 6th call, I finally picked up. "Hello, Clayton." "Mom, thank God." His voice was strained, exhausted. "I've been calling for 3 days. Why haven't you answered?" I turned the page of my newspaper, scanning an article about emerging markets. "I've been busy." "Busy with what?" "Business," I said simply. "The kind that pays for itself." There was a long pause. I could hear Lennox in the background, her voice high and anxious, though I couldn't make out the words. "Mom, we need to talk. Lennox is. She's not handling this well." I looked out my floor-to-ceiling windows at the Manhattan skyline. From up here, the city looked manageable, ordered. Down at street level, I knew it was chaos. But from this perspective, everything had its place. "What would you like to discuss?" "This whole situation with the apartment and the car payments." "Mom, we can't afford—" "Then I suggest you make some adjustments to your lifestyle." Another pause. "Mom, please. I know we hurt you. I know we said terrible things, but we're family. We can work this out." Family. The word that had been used to manipulate me for so many years, wielded like a weapon whenever I showed the slightest sign of independence or self-respect. "Are we family, Clayton? Because family members don't usually slap each other at dinner parties." I heard him take a shaky breath. "Lennox wants to apologize. She wants to make it right." "Does she? Or does she want her rent paid? That's not fair." "Fair?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Clayton, I've been subsidizing your entire adult life for 5 years. I paid for your apartment, your car, your credit card bills, your medical expenses, your vacations. And not once did either of you say thank you, because you never knew. You just assumed you were entitled to live beyond your means. We didn't know you were paying for anything." "Exactly. You didn't know because you didn't care enough to wonder how you could afford a $1,200 apartment in Manhattan on your salary. You didn't question how you qualified for a lease on a BMW when your credit was mediocre at best. You just accepted it all as your due." I could hear Lennox crying in the background now, and part of me, the part that had spent decades smoothing over conflicts and making everyone else comfortable, wanted to soften my words. But I didn't. "The lease on your apartment expires in 3 weeks," I continued. "The car payments stop tomorrow. I suggest you start making plans. Mom, you can't just cut us off like this. We have nowhere to go. You have jobs. You have options. You're both healthy, educated adults. But where will we live? How will we get to work without the car? The same way millions of other people in this city manage. Public transportation, roommates, apartments you can actually afford on your own income." There was a muffled conversation on the other end of the line. Then Lennox's voice came through, shaky and desperate. "Norma, it's me. Please, I need to talk to you." I waited. "I know I was horrible to you. I know I said unforgivable things. But I was stressed about money, about the future, and I took it out on you. I'm so sorry. Are you sorry you hurt me? Or sorry you lost your meal ticket?" She was quiet for a long moment. "Both," she said finally, and I had to give her credit for honesty. "I'm sorry I hurt you, and I'm terrified about what's going to happen to us now." "What did you think was going to happen, Lennox? Did you think you could demand hundreds of thousands of dollars from me, physically assault me in front of witnesses, and then continue living the life I'd been secretly funding? I didn't know you were funding it. You didn't know because you didn't want to know. It was easier to believe I was some doddering old woman who got lucky when her husband died than to consider that I might be a capable person with my own resources and intelligence." I heard her break down completely then, sobbing into the phone. Despite everything, I felt a pang of sympathy. She was young, only 28, and she'd been raised in a world that told her she was entitled to certain things simply by virtue of being beautiful and married to a man with prospects. But sympathy wasn't the same as forgiveness, and it certainly wasn't the same as enabling. "Lennox," I said when her crying subsided, "do you know what I was doing when I was your age?" "No," she whispered. "I was working double shifts as a waitress while trying to finish my college degree at night. I was living in a studio apartment with a Murphy bed and a hot plate. I was eating ramen noodles for dinner and walking to work to save bus fare. I was doing whatever it took to build a life for myself and my child." I paused, remembering those exhausting, terrifying, exhilarating years when everything had felt possible if I just worked hard enough. I didn't have anyone to pay my bills or solve my problems. I certainly didn't have anyone to slap around when I was frustrated with my circumstances. I figured it out because I had to. "But that's different," Lennox protested. "You didn't have choices." "I had the same choices you have now. I could work hard and build something, or I could look for someone else to take care of me. I chose to work." Clayton came back on the line. "Mom, please, just give us a chance to prove we can do better." "You've had 5 years to do better, Clayton. 5 years to notice that your lifestyle didn't match your income. 5 years to treat me with basic respect and gratitude. You didn't need to know about my business empire to say thank you when I helped with your expenses, or to include me in important decisions, or to stand up to your wife when she spoke to me badly." The truth was settling between us like dust after an explosion. All those years of small slights and casual dismissals, all those times when they'd made me feel like an inconvenience or an obligation rather than a person worthy of love and respect. "I want you to understand something," I said, my voice steady and calm. "This isn't about punishing you. This is about recognizing that the dynamic we've had for the past 5 years has been unhealthy for all of us. I've been enabling you to live beyond your means while allowing you to treat me badly. That stops now." "So, what are you saying? That we're not your family anymore?" I looked around my penthouse, at the life I'd built in secret, the success I'd achieved while everyone assumed I was just marking time until I died. "I'm saying that from now on, our relationship, if we have one, will be based on mutual respect, rather than financial dependency. You'll succeed or fail on your own merits, and you'll treat me well because you want to, not because you think you have to." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "And if we can't do that?" Clayton asked quietly. "Then we'll both know where we stand." After I hung up, I sat for a long time looking out at the city. Somewhere out there, my son and daughter-in-law were probably having a very different conversation than any they'd had before. They were probably realizing that the comfortable life they'd taken for granted was about to disappear, and they would have to decide what kind of people they wanted to be when everything was stripped away. Part of me hoped they would rise to the occasion. Part of me hoped they would discover the strength and dignity that came from standing on your own feet. But I wasn't going to wait around to find out. 6 months later, I was tending to the herb garden on my penthouse terrace when Margaret called with an update I hadn't asked for but wasn't surprised to receive. "They moved back in with Lennox's parents in New Jersey," she reported, her voice carrying a note of amusement. "Apparently, the transition to financial reality has been challenging." I continued deadheading the basil, breathing in the sharp, clean scent that reminded me of the summers I'd spent as a child helping my grandmother with her garden. "I see. Clayton took a second job driving for a rideshare company on weekends. Lennox is working at a boutique in the mall part-time." Margaret paused. "Her mother called your building's management company 3 times trying to get information about you. Wanted to know if you'd be willing to meet for coffee. And what did they tell her? That they don't give out tenant information to anyone." I smiled. The management company didn't know I owned the building. As far as they were concerned, I was just another resident who paid her rent on time and kept to herself. It was one of many layers of privacy I'd built around my real life. "There's something else," Margaret continued. "Clayton applied for a promotion at his company. Apparently, he's been working longer hours, taking on additional responsibilities. His supervisor called it a complete transformation in work ethic." This surprised me. "Really?" "According to my source, and yes, I have sources everywhere, He told his boss that he'd been coasting for years and wanted to prove he could do better. I set down my gardening shears and looked out over the city. It was a beautiful autumn day, the kind where the light hit the buildings just right and made everything look like a painting. "Margaret, why are you telling me this?" "Because I've been your attorney for 2 years, and I've watched you agonize over this decision. I thought you might want to know that maybe, they're learning something from the experience." After I hung up, I went back to my gardening, but my mind kept wandering. Was Clayton really changing? Or was he just scrambling to replace the income he'd lost? Was Lennox working because she'd gained some understanding of personal responsibility? Or because she had no other choice? It didn't matter, I realized. Their motivations were their own business now. What mattered was that I had finally freed myself from the exhausting role of secret benefactor, from the constant worry about their financial welfare, from the soul-crushing experience of being taken for granted by the people who should have loved me most. The truth was, I felt lighter than I had in years. That evening, I had dinner with Rosa Martinez, the owner of a small restaurant chain I'd helped expand from a single location to 12. She was about my age, a widow who'd built her business from nothing after her husband's death. And over the past few years, we'd become genuine friends. "You look different," she observed over our appetizers. "Happier." "I cut some dead weight out of my life," I said. Rosa laughed. "Ah, family problems. The most expensive kind." We talked about business for a while. Her restaurants were considering expansion into Connecticut, and she wanted my advice on market analysis, but eventually the conversation turned more personal. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Walking away from family?" I considered the question seriously. "I didn't walk away from family, Rosa. I walked away from people who were using me. There's a difference. But don't you miss them?" "I miss who I hoped they could be," I admitted. "I miss the relationship I wanted to have with my son. But I don't miss feeling invisible in my own life. I don't miss being treated like an ATM with feelings." Rosa nodded, understanding. She'd had her own struggles with adult children who saw her success as their inheritance rather than her achievement. "The hardest part," I continued, "was realizing that I'd enabled their behavior for years. I kept thinking that if I just gave them enough, if I just made their lives comfortable enough, they would naturally become grateful, loving people. But you can't buy love or respect. You can only demand it. And if they don't give it, then you know where you stand." 2 weeks later, I was in my office reviewing quarterly reports when the building's doorman called up. "Mrs. Patterson, there's a young man here to see you. Says he's your son." My heart jumped, though I kept my voice steady. "Is he alone?" "Yes, ma'am." I thought about it for a moment. I could have him sent away, could continue the silence that had stretched between us for months, but something in me, curiosity maybe, or the last stubborn remnants of maternal love, made me nod. "Send him up." Clayton looked different when I opened the door, thinner, tired, but somehow more solid than he'd been 6 months ago. His clothes were less expensive but better cared for, and he carried himself like someone who'd been working hard with his hands as well as his mind. "Hello, Mom." "Clayton." I stepped aside to let him in, watching as he took in the penthouse with new eyes. 6 months ago, he would have been calculating its value, imagining how it could benefit him. Now he just looked around with something that might have been sadness. "It's beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you." We sat in the living room, an awkward distance between us on the sofa. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. "I got promoted," he said finally. "I heard. Congratulations." "I'm making $85,000 now. With the rideshare driving, we're bringing in about $4,000 a month total." I waited for him to continue. "It's not enough for the life we were living before, but it's enough for the life we're living now." He looked down at his hands, which I noticed were rougher than they used to be. "We got our own place. Nothing fancy, a 1-bedroom in Queens, but we're paying for it ourselves. How does that feel?" He was quiet for a long time. "Scary," he said finally, "but also, I don't know, real?" I nodded. I understood that feeling. "Mom, I came here to apologize. Not because I want anything from you. I know that's over. But because you deserve to hear it. The way we treated you was unforgivable. The way I let Lennox speak to you. The way I just assumed you owed us support. The way I never bothered to really see who you were. He trailed off, his voice breaking slightly. Go on. I was so wrapped up in feeling entitled to success that I never learned how to actually earn it. And I was so comfortable being taken care of that I never learned how to take care of anyone else, including you. Tears were rolling down his cheeks now, and I felt my own eyes beginning to burn. I don't expect you to forgive me, he continued. I don't expect you to want a relationship with me. But I needed you to know that I understand now what I lost. Not the money. I mean, yes, the money. But that's not the worst part. I lost my mother's respect. I lost the right to be proud of myself. I lost the chance to be someone you could be proud of. I reached over and took his hand, feeling the new calluses from his weekend driving job. Clayton, I said gently, you're 35 years old. It's not too late to become someone I can be proud of. It's not too late to become someone you can be proud of. He looked up at me with hope and fear warring in his eyes. But it has to be real, I continued. It has to come from you, not from wanting to get back into my good graces or my will. You have to build a life you're proud of, because that's the kind of person you want to be, not because you think it's what I want to hear. He nodded slowly. I understand. We talked for another hour. He told me about his new responsibilities at work, about learning to budget and plan for the future, about the strange satisfaction he'd discovered in earning his own way. I told him about my businesses, about the decades of secret success, about the loneliness of having no one to share my achievements with. When he got up to leave, we hugged for the first time in years. It felt tentative, fragile, like something that might heal if given enough time and care. Mom, he said as he reached the door. Would it be okay if I called you sometime? Not for money or help, just to talk? I smiled. I'd like that. After he left, I stood at my windows watching the sun set over the city I'd conquered one investment at a time. The phone rang. Probably Rosa, wanting to finalize our plans for dinner tomorrow, but I let it go to voicemail. For the first time in my adult life, I was exactly where I wanted to be, surrounded by success I'd earned and respect I'd demanded. I'd lost a son and daughter-in-law who saw me as an obligation, but I'd gained something more valuable. The knowledge that I was strong enough to stand alone, successful enough to thrive independently, and valuable enough to demand better treatment from the people in my life. Whether Clayton would be part of my future remained to be seen. But either way, I would be fine. For the first time in 67 years, I was truly, completely free. The city sparkled below me like a promise kept, and I was ready for whatever came next. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.